We're live.
Amazing.
Hello,
Hi,
gents.
Brendan. Hi, Errol. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for
Good
having
to
me.
be here.
Yeah.
This is our third edition of our GTM Engineers special webinar. Um, we do these things because our members ask us to, they come to us with inquiries and challenges, and we try to get the coolest people to talk about it. And this one is pretty special. I'm pretty excited about it, not only because it's been really cool to work with Brendan and Errol to set this up, but also I think it's really high time we start challenging our mental models on outbound, right? A lot of us find ourselves in the situation where we're trying to do signal-based selling, right? And we have a signal, we do a campaign on it, and so on and so forth. But in the end, we end up targeting the same list of people as everyone else in our space. And given how readily available this mass email outbound is, one starts to question, am I really cutting through the clutter? And so Brendan and Errol are the best people to talk about this. So thank you everyone who's joining us. I think we're good to go. Let's start with maybe intros. Um, Brendan, please tell us who's Brendan Short, what is he up to, and why should we care about micro campaigns in 10 seconds?
Sweet. Yeah. Howdy. I'm in Austin. I started as an SDR, was a head of sales, started a couple sales tech companies. Most recently was at Apollo. And I think micro campaigns are one of the motions that's working right now. I think we'll get into this, but I think the old way of doing outbound does not work anymore. And so micro campaigns is one answer to that leverages AI and some fun stuff and actually gets results. So that's why you should care.
Excellent.
So I'm Erol. I've been in B2B SaaS for 15 years, 5 of that working at other companies that did tremendously well, 10 of that running my own SaaS company, which is, it's funny, the logo's in this picture here. But basically the reason you should care about what we're talking about is, I learned the hard way. I learned a lot of hard lessons in my last company about the dangers of fake success early on. And what we're going to talk about today, I think, is going to would have saved me 5 years in my founder journey. And so far in my new journey, working as the founder of the Solo Capitalist, I basically build lots of niche B2B SaaS apps that are profitable on day one. This is the strategy that's made that work. So I'm hoping that it will help people avoid my mistakes. That was
Excellent.
like 30 seconds, but it was good, I think, right? Brandon's not.
That was good. That was a one-take wonder. Now, at the end of the session, we're going to have a live interaction with a few people from the audience, right? If you want to volunteer for Brendan and Errol to build a micro campaign live based on your context, just send us a message in the chat saying volunteer, and I'll pick you, I'll unmute you at the end of this, and we can build one together. So just keep that in mind, make yourself heard. Now, let me give the mic to Brendan to talk to us about a very familiar visual that will help us sort of lay the scene.
Awesome. Yeah, I won't spend a ton of time in this. Probably anybody that is looking at this is familiar with this kind of overall sentiment. As you can see here, sequencers were created a decade and a half ago, which were these magical tools that worked really well until we kind of cannibalized them, in my opinion. And we continue to basically just increase volume. What happened when we increased volume is, of course, the returns on outbound decreased. And that's kind of the moment in time that we find ourselves today, where there's a lot of automation, which means a lot of kind of quote unquote spray and pray. And one of the things I'm doing right now is trying to explore, what does the future look like? And how do we get, I personally don't kind of philosophically love sending a bunch of high volume stuff. I think it's very inefficient. Right? It's not good for sellers. It's not good for buyers. And so how do we find the right prospects at the right time with as few touches as possible? That feels like a win-win on both sides. And so those are the things that I'm exploring. I do think that AI and automation can be tools to do this. meaning they can be tools to increase quality and not just quantity. And micro campaigns are certainly one of those kind of arrows in the quiver, if you will. I'm curious, Erol, what's your take on kind of where we're at right now with this chart, and maybe like where do you think things are going to go?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've been talking about how like doing the right thing for the buyer is the right thing to do for like ever. And, you know, we've been talking about this forever, and the most obvious inevitable thing is happening. The thing that I compare this to is, you know, my first rodeo in SaaS was in B2B marketing with display ads, which everybody can agree was such a terrible garbage experience, right? We went from like display ads to punch the monkey ads and whatever. But if you look at display ads today on Instagram, Facebook, whatever, pretty damn freaking good. I mean, like I, as a consumer today, you know, the other day came across a bunch of products that were lookalikes to something else I was looking into that were better than what I first found. And then I ended up buying one. So like there's been this, thanks to AI, renaissance in display. And I think that we're just going through something similar, you know, in the B2B email space.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. All right, let's go to the next slide here. So let's talk a little bit about micro campaigns. I'm going to define what a micro campaign is, and then we'll talk about, I'll give you a couple examples, and then yeah, I think it'll be more interesting at the end when we go into a couple of live examples and just like the thinking behind how you build a micro campaign and how you might think about building micro campaigns in your own business. So first of all, there's filtering. There's kind of this concept of signal-based selling right now, which I'm a fan of. I think signals are great. It's basically a signal is, you know, there's a couple hundred of these signals out there, first and third party data. There's probably a handful that are really relevant for any one business. And so you want to think about what are the most important signals. Effectively, a signal is just like a proxy to show intent to buy, or you know, even just intent to have a sales conversation. So that's kind of the first layer of a micro campaign. The second layer is relevance and timeliness. So this is relevant or timely this week, which typically means, we'll come back to that in a second, which typically means this is a small list of people, maybe 50 to 250, highly targeted, a really tight list. And so an example of this would be a company that sells recruiting, right? So they're selling basically candidates. You know, they want to go after whatever, Series A to Series D companies, specifically in SaaS, maybe in the US or Europe or whatever the geolocations are. Fine, those are like kind of your standard filters in a B2B database. Yes, you still need those things. Where it gets interesting is, how do you go find 2 or 3 or 5 other signals that are timely that you then layer in on top of that? So the obvious one for somebody that's hiring is, you know, I want to look at any companies in my ICP who just put out a job rec in the last, say, 5 days. That's an interesting company and person to go reach out to. And if you go reach out to that VP of sales, I would argue that the message actually is less relevant. You're going to say, hey, we have a pool of candidates that are pre-vetted. Here's a few that I think might be a good fit for the AE role you just opened up. Do you want to chat? Like, it doesn't have to be an amazing message if you reach out at the right time in a micro campaign. However, if you reach out with that same exact message in 2 months or even in a month, that VP of sales might just say, hey, we just hired somebody last week, right? And so this is where a micro campaign, the timing of it is super important, where you're stacking a bunch of these signals, and hopefully there's at least 1 or 2 that are timely signals, which also means you're reaching out to that prospect within days, certainly weeks of that signal, versus your competitor getting to them. Cool. So hopefully that's helpful. This is, and like I said at the beginning, like we all kind of, hopefully, probably everybody here is aware, like the old playbook just doesn't work. Going into kind of the same B2B database, loading up a basic filter, putting them into a basic sequence, and just letting these kind of 100 emails go out every single day, like that doesn't work like it did 5 years ago. It's not that it doesn't work at all, but doesn't work to the degree that it did a few years ago, because everybody's doing it, because attention spans are shorter, because there's competition everywhere. So really the goal here is, again, identifying what are the signals that are relevant, how do you stack those signals, and then actually being able to build an offer off the back of that outreach, which is what Erol is going to talk about. I think this is like maybe the most underrated thing actually is the offer. I think people don't talk about the offer as much. So I'm excited to continue to learn from Erol on that front. And as you think about building a micro campaign, I think about this as like kind of a portfolio of bets. This is like kind of, whatever this GTM engineer role, kind of a growth role, whatever it is, outbound SDR, outbound automation, outbound operations, maybe RevOps to some degree. Doesn't really matter like necessarily the title. I think the job to be done is how are you booking pipeline, whether that's inbound, outbound, PLG, upsell, cross-sell, retention, kind of throughout the life cycle. I think about a micro campaign in a traditional sense as like this is a traditional outbound motion done kind of in this new novel way that wasn't possible 3 years ago because we didn't have these magical AI tools and agents to go build all of these different scraping capabilities to go build this kind of rich data set and then filter against it. So this is basically you want to be building kind of campaigns every week, every other week, have some sort of cadence around it. This is an example of a micro campaign. There might be percent of sales headcount. Maybe they posted a job offer or a job rec with specific keywords. Maybe they were on your website in the last week and they commented on a post of, somebody at your company. When you stack all of these things, you start to see, okay, that one person is really showing a lot of intent and we should go reach out to them this week. And so that's where you have these lists that are kind of rotating through. Erol,
if I can share one observation when I'm looking at this, Brendan, I think there's a really interesting parallel here. And we'll talk about this a little bit today, but to the product world, right? Where it used to be the case where we used to like use surveys, right? To get superficial information from people, like what are we doing better? And then we moved into user behavior analysis, right? With Amplitude and products like that. And what I'm seeing here is like, these are all verbs, like they did something, they did X, then they did Y. And it's moving from this view of like this demographic view of, all of our customers have noses, so let's filter on people who have noses, to like, what are the things that people are doing? And then using that to like have a different view of who that is.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great, I like that. I think that's spot on. And I think this is also like people talk about, isn't micro campaigns like ABM or like, haven't we always been doing this? And like humans have kind of been doing this to some degree for sure. The kind of the best reps have been doing this. I think two things that are different. One, like we have this magical thing called an LLM that we can tap into now that like does unlock this at scale. And then the second thing to your point, Erol, is like we have a lot more behavioral data on a prospect that again is an intent signal, right? So it's they visited the website or they commented on LinkedIn or we have data on product usage for if you have a free product, like I can see, are they using the product? Are several people using the product? What parts of our product are they using? All of these things kind of come together in a way to paint a picture around where somebody is in their discovery of your product. And, my goal is always with salespeople, I like to call them Sherpas, like the best salespeople are Sherpas or guides. And the funnel looks really different than it did 5 years ago or 10 years ago. Prospects are able to discover way more on their own, play with the product on their own. And so we just want to meet them where they're at as salespeople and be able to continue to kind of Sherpa them through that buying experience.
One thing that's interesting to what you're saying. So like the haven't we been doing this all along? So here's a story from my personal experience. So 2 years before ChatGPT came out, I was already working with LLMs. I sort of like, this is already, something I was hacking on, the direction I was going. And I had this idea where I was like, you know what? I'm going to build robots that would like go and automate the SDR role. And this was like 2 years before ChatGPT. And I remember we'd book the meeting, we'd go in and we'd say, okay, here's our sales process. Like you bring in your SDRs into a room and they're going to tell us what they do and we're going to get robots to do them. And that idea basically fell through. Like we couldn't build a business because what happened was, even though we have this like process and we're doing these things, everybody was doing something totally different. But the common thread that all those things that people were doing was, we have no idea what the pitch should be to this business. Like, we don't. And so the reason we have salespeople who was like, I will call, I'll walk in, I'll send gifts, I'll do whatever it takes to just like get this signal to, because it's like, they don't even know what to sell or what to say. And so, it's like, yeah, we're doing it, but it's basically this like shotgun approach. And what you're showing here has nothing to do with shotgun. It's like, precision laser guided, not even missile, like bullets.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. My goal is like, how do you reach out to as few people as possible with the best results? And so I think we might have, do we have one more slide here? I think that's the other piece here. We may not. The other piece is like, how do you send 10x fewer emails, but get 10x better results, right? And for the business, net, that's a positive direction to be building your go-to-market motion around. I think that's the end of my slides. Yeah, okay, perfect. So yeah, let me just say, like, I think building this list of people and companies to go after at the right time is, again, like, at least in the last few months of the work that I've been doing and working with very smart companies, this is one of the things that's actually really working for them to build pipeline. Like I said at the beginning, I think then what do you say in that message is just as important. What are you actually telling them or asking them for? And I think that's something that is underexplored. And I think that'll be like a big thing in the next year or two. So, Erol, would love for you to educate us some more around that.
Yeah. So before we jump in the slide, Tarek, just to stay on the thing, I think there's two pieces of context that are important here. The first one is just getting clarity on why this matters. So what I'm going to try to do, linking into what Brendan's saying, is, for me, having done outbound for a really long time and seen a really good time in doing it and a really bad time doing it, was, it's easy when you're starting to have a hypothesis and to do something and everything's working great, and then to think what's going on. It's when something goes wrong, do you know what to do? Because a lot of like, I have so many founder friends, they get to one, and it always changes. It's 1 million, 3 million, 10 million, sometimes 50 million ARR. And then they suddenly hit a brick wall and then nothing. Like, they just can't grow, and then they start languishing. And they don't know what to do because they didn't do this in a very methodical way. So what I'm going to try to do here with this irresistible offer piece is to link it to what Brendan's saying, to enable you to build a campaign where every step of the way, you know what you're doing. So from a scientist's perspective, it's not just like, how do I be right? It's how do I know I'm right? And how do I iterate in a systematic way that every step of the way I know what to do? So that's number one. Number two, just to get this out of the way, I think a common thing that everybody gets wrong with irresistible offers is, they think that sending an email that's like, hey, Erol, if I could bring you 50 leads in the next 7 days, like, would that be worth your time? Like, they think that that's an irresistible offer, and it's not. So that's not what we're going to talk about. So for a second, put that aside. And with that, let's go to our first slide. So the idea behind this irresistible offer methodology is that you want to do three things. You want to convert every true ICP with minimal effort. Not only that, you want to push bad people away. You want to push the people who are the wrong fit away. And the third category thing is for the people where it's the wrong timing, kind of relates to the first point. For people where the timing is wrong, you want to plant the exact right idea in their head so that when that issue does come up, when the timing is right, they know to come back to you. Right? So it's moving away from this way of thinking of how do I convert? How do I convert? What time of day do I send an email? What do I say? It's like, we're not trying to convert. We are trying to go and convert and achieve these goals. And the idea is that using Brendan's methodology, if you go from selling the same bottle of water in the Arctic to I'm now selling ice cold water in the desert, so Brendan's fixed that problem. Now it's like, how do we remove the last bit of friction to make sure that that water in the desert just like flies off the shelves? Because today, even doing what Brendan's doing isn't enough. Like, what we'll do is we'll say, oh, we're selling water in the desert. We're so amazing. We did this targeting right. And we're going to put a minefield around the bottle of water. right? And we're going to make it so that the bottle of water costs $35,000. Like, no, we want that bottle of water in the desert to fly. So that's what we're going to do in the next few slides. Next slide. So the beauty of email 3. Of what Brendan described versus what we used to do is, in the old way, we needed a lot of sophistication in our outbound campaigns because we didn't know what to say to people, right? So it would be like, all right, Brendan fits my demographic profile. I'm going to start a sequence. The sequence has 8 different touch points. Each one has a different message. And we're just going to hope we kind of get lucky somewhere along the way. But we know that that's not how that works, because the person getting those messages, there are different types of people on the adoption curve, for one. So like how they think about the value proposition changes. The sequence of the messages matter. Like, it's a fact that if I send you a message and it puts it into the person's brain that you do X, you're not going to look at message B, C, D the same way, right? So the order of the sequence matters. And then when you add deliverability to that, it's like, okay, well, what if they didn't see the anchor message and now they're getting B, C, D? And it's like, it doesn't make any sense. So there was all this complexity in the old way of doing this before you knew exactly what to say to whom. And you had to be a deliverability expert and like an A/B testing expert and have all types of complexity and whatnot, expertise to be able to run that. So if we go to the next slide. So today, thanks to what Brendan was talking about, a lot of these problems sort of go away because we do know who we're targeting and where they sit on the adoption curve because there's so much information about the person that you're targeting. The sequence of messaging doesn't matter because it's the same message, right? If we're doing our job right, I'm just going to say the same message over and over and over again. And I can send that through carrier pigeon ads. I can send it in an email from domain A, B, C, D. It just doesn't matter. It's the same message over and over again. So the sequence doesn't matter. Timing is something that you don't control. We know the message, we know the person. So the only gap is how do we get the CTA offer right so that we convert these people? And a converse way of thinking about it, going back to what we originally said, is how can I craft an offer that is so good that if the person sees it and they don't take it, I am totally fine. Like, if I show you my perfect best offer possible and you walk away, I don't even need to bother about you. Unsubscribe, great, my friend. At least you saw my offer and hit unsubscribe. I'm never going to think about you one more second of my life, right? So that's what we're going to try to sort of do. Next slide. And so the way to think about this like offer equation, this is, again, we talked about product management. This is from an intercom product framework of how you get people to do stuff. It's a derivative of 10 other product frameworks. But basically, it comes down to these things, right? What is the push for the person to do something? What is the pull? What is the thing so external factors pushing them? What is it that's attracting that person? What's pulling them to do the change? And then those two divided by the friction. So if you have basically negative friction, it actually also can propel movement. If you have high friction, it's the denominator, it lowers it. So the way to sort of do this is you can't really handle push. That's just your product in your market. That's the environment. But you can do pull in a couple of ways. The first one is build a better product. Now, GTM engineers don't have a lot of control over this. One place where AI is helping is, what if you as a GTM engineer can build micro products on top of the core product, right? And a good example of this is, let's say you have some crazy email deliverability product, right? That's like you're selling this huge solution and there's an implementation. What about mxtools.com? Something like that, where somebody just like wants to figure out if they're on a blacklist, just create a micro app using AI. It takes like $10 and maybe a few hours of your time. And now you have something productized to offer people, right? So that's one way to do it. But where I spend all of my time is on the reducing friction time. So, being obsessive about figuring out how can I take whatever that offer is and that pull, how do I make it basically either free or literally 10x cheaper than the next. So if somebody sells it for $0.01, sell it for 0.0001 cents, right? 10, 100 times. Like, how do you bring the friction of costs down? How do you, targeting people who can make decisions independently. So one of the things that people love to do is this ABM thing where it's like, I'm reaching your boss and your friends and your mom, and I'm trying to just forget about that. It's like, how can I put something in your hand that you just convert on right there? Like you have the authority to do. And AWS is a good example. Like, can a developer buy AWS individually? No, but a developer can sure as heck hack an MVP for free. And how do you deliver that value in under 60 seconds? And how do you shift the messaging to be all about showing and not telling? So it's like, dude, I don't even want you to read my email. Just click on this link and click 5 buttons. And in 60 seconds, you're going to see that my product is better. So Irresistible Offer is about rethinking, moving away from this idea of what do I say? When do I say it? How do I say it? Like, what are all the hacks? Forget about, just obsess about value and figure out how you put it in that person's hands. I'll pause there. One thing.
Can I give one more example?
Yeah, go ahead. I was going to ask you to comment.
So I was just going to say the other example there. Yeah, the other example is that comes to mind is like the example that I gave before, which is somebody that's kind of selling recruiting services. The way I think about building an offer is, especially in like the context of a pure outbound message that a GTM engineer is kind of building emotion around, is basically like, how do you end an email without saying, do you want to spend 30 minutes with me, right? Do you want to see a demo, right? Like, what is the call to action other than that? And one of those, to your point, it's exactly right. It's like, how do you just add value and proactively give them something? Ideally, it's like tailored to them. And so if you're selling recruiting services, you've built a micro campaign, you've identified a VP of sales that just opened up, a rec for an enterprise AE, and they just opened that up a couple of days ago. You would just send them the email and you say, here are 3 candidates I thought would be a good fit for you. If you want to chat with any of them or learn more about our pre-vetted pool of candidates, let me know, right? Like, if I'm a VP of sales and somebody just gave me 3 candidates, I'm like, okay, that's amazing. And I think this is like kind of a fairly common play for recruiting. But just think about, like, if you're on the receiving end of this email, what is the thing that you would receive frictionlessly, be able to get value, and then be able to say, okay, cool, Errol gets what I'm trying to accomplish here. I'm going to chat with him. I think that's like a framework that I would use.
And the perfect example of what you just said. So I was going through this last night. So one of the companies that I launched 4 or 5 months ago is this company, TryKit.ai. And basically it's a better email finder verifier. It costs literally 10x less than everybody else, and it bounces 10x less emails. So it's like, it's a better product, and it's one of these things where you're like, okay, like, why everybody should want that? And there's this like desire to mass blast everybody and tell them and convince them. And so I'm working on my first mass outbound campaign last night, and I was thinking about this. So I'm like, I'm about to give a talk about this. I was looking at this slide. I was thinking about, like, how am I going to do this? And it hit me that there's kind of like a litmus test to know if you're doing this right. And the litmus test is the following: how much does it hurt to give what you're giving? Like, when I give you a white paper, it doesn't really hurt me. Like, I built that white paper to give it to you. Like, it doesn't hurt my feelings. If I, to your point, those like 3 leads that or hiring candidates that you're giving the VP, if that costs you like $30 to generate those things, if you give that to 1,000 VPs of sales, right? $30 times 1,000, that's $30,000. Like, that kind of hurts, right? It's like, I worked really hard to create this. I spent all this time, like $30,000 hurts. And so like it kept on coming back to me with my own product offer, where I was like, this thing has to be free. Like, it really sucks. It is 10x cheaper today. It is 10x better. But man, oh man, if I make it free, how can you say no? And the key there is, I mean, there's a little bit more to it where it's like, for my product, I built it in a way, it has a lower cost structure than everybody else, so I can do it. But the thing is, like, shouldn't I benefit from that better cost structure? Shouldn't I get the benefit of the profits? But like, where I ended up with is like, but this hurts more. And that's how I know it's a better offer. So that's just like another way to kind of think about that.
Yeah, there's alpha in that friction.
There's alpha in the friction. And I mean, you worked at Apollo, right? Like, how did Apollo do it at first? unlimited free leads. I mean, there were limitations on it, right? But like, how much did it cost to build that database in the first place? How much does it cost to operate that database? Google search, like, how much did it hurt being like, I have indexed the world's knowledge better than anybody else,
Totally.
and I'm giving it away free? So the more it hurts, the more. And so and then the last thing before we go into the interactive, like, kind of Q&A part is basically the following. Here's where this pays off. So we talked about, all right, we're in the like, we found the person in the desert who's dying of thirst, thanks to Brendan's, like, methodology, approach, philosophy. Now there's the water in front of them. And there's a really big assumption in every company that this is the right thing. Like, he's dying of thirst. Like, he needs this water. And that is the thing that so many companies get wrong and waste so many millions on, is like, maybe that person doesn't want water. Like, it's like amazing how many people will be like, once they've decided, especially in a buying group, that what they want is Pepsi, they will actually like faint before they actually try the water that's sitting in front of them. So one of the benefits of the irresistible offer is it becomes the ultimate null hypothesis test to figure out, like, do you have value? Because if you give an irresistible offer and they don't bite, that is an incredibly valuable data point to learn from, because it's like your whole universe is collapsing, right? And so, I think so I'll end it there. But the value of the irresistible offer isn't about like, hey, if I could come in your business and like do this and like you'd be rich and have Rolexes and fast. It's not about that. It's about like, how do I think scientifically about testing whether my value is actually what I think it is? Because 9 out of 10 times, it's not what the entrepreneur or the founding team or the early product or the early customers thinks the value is. It's almost never the case. And this will tell you if you actually know what you're doing. That's it.
Well said. Tark, you're muted, I think.
Yeah.
Although there's some good questions coming in.
Am I audible? Yes.
Yeah.
I was saying, Brendan, this is the perfect time to get in some questions from the audience. I think we've really done a good job of sort of selling this concept as a challenge to our mental model of doing outbound. Now, I think what would help the audience is to get a bit more practical. So maybe let's use this bit before we go into the live sort of interactive exercise to answer those questions. So, for example, micro campaigns are great, but people still need to feed their pipeline, right? Need to reach some volume targets. How do you do that with small campaigns?
That's a good question. So two things. One, I saw somebody else in the chat say like that kind of micro campaigns is you still need the fundamentals of outbound, which is true. This is not throwing away everything we've learned over the last, couple decades of doing kind of the traditional outbound motion. You still need an ICP and key buyer personas. Like, obviously you can't build a micro campaign and then reach out to these people if they're not in your ICP, if they're not going to buy your product. So this stuff's all kind of layered on top of the fundamentals. I would say this is also, at least personally, I look at micro campaigns as kind of like an additional motion on top of the things that you're already doing, or kind of honing in on some of the things that you're already doing. So tightening up the kind of targeting. There's a volume game. We all kind of know, you need a certain amount of activities based on a conversion rate. You're going to get a certain amount of meetings, which are going to convert into a certain amount of pipeline, et cetera, right? This is kind of the funnel of outbound. I think that should still exist. What you're doing with micro campaigns is you're layering on or bolting on an additional pipeline, or you're kind of fine tuning within your existing pipeline. So I think about micro campaigns as, because you cannot predict how many people are going to fit the micro. I can't predict how many VPs of sales are going to open up a job rec tomorrow. I can't predict that, right? I can't forecast that. I can't control that. And so a micro campaign is you're reliant on these signals being hit, right? And so you're doing this on the side. It's less predictable, but it's going to convert way higher. So when you do have hits on these, you should reach out right away, and they're going to convert significantly higher, 10x or more higher. So I would think about, once you start running this motion, calculating roughly how many people are fitting into these micro campaigns, number one. And number two is, how do you spin up new micro campaigns, new ideas? I think about a micro campaign as like, you should be launching these every week or every other week, systematizing a process around it. I think about them as a portfolio of bets. And so over, a 6-month period, you might launch 20 micro campaigns. And if you know like kind of portfolio theory for an investor, they invest in 20 companies knowing that 18 will go to zero, one might break even, and one is going to hit, but it's going to quote unquote return the fund. I would think about a micro campaign in the same way, where you're running these experiments. You don't know for sure that these things are going to work. Most of them, like half of them or more, will not work. And so I think that's also important to communicate to revenue leaders, is like, this is where it's like a growth thing. It's like, we're running experiments here to see what works. And then if it does, the 1 or 2 experiments that do work, we're going to be able to scale these things with AI agents, et cetera. And so I would say, I would think about like forecasting, building kind of a simple Google Sheet calculator to say, this is the number of people I expect to be in a micro campaign and how many micro campaigns I want to launch this quarter, and then just kind of build out a calculator around that. Hopefully that answers the question. The TLDR is like, this stuff's hard to predict, and you can't exactly control it. Anything to add, Erol?
I agree with all that. I think from looking at the questions, I think there's a lot of like how to apply this very practically. So it seems like there's 2 types of like, how do I make this practical, right? One of them is this question of like, okay, this is great. How is this going to help me hit my revenue target? Because like basically what you're saying is like, you're shrinking my at-bats. So I think that there's 2 kind of answers for that. One from like the founder perspective of like company building. One is from like the individual sales rep perspective. From the sales rep perspective, all of the, like, think of all the time that you are spending wasting your time. Like 98% of your time in sales and prospecting and whatever is time wasted. Like even your mass blasting, like it works small, like you are wasting your time. Your goal should be to, like, when you step into your role, to say, can I make money here, and can I be successful here, and can I hit my goals here? Because if you can't, it doesn't matter if you're hitting your goals this month, this week, this month, this quarter. If it feels like you're just like barely getting by and you're always living in fear, that job sucks. Wouldn't it be better to just know that this company and this job and this product ain't going to make it, and I'm going to go spend my time somewhere else where I can where I can be successful? Because that's where all of my friends in sales, like, it's like, what a waste of life and time that was, is what all the people in the bad situations say. So like, you're paying for even if you're hitting your targets, you're paying for the cost. So that's like one way of looking at it from your perspective. It's like, okay, hit my target, but like, does it feel like you're always drowning? Because like hitting your target is meaningless, right? There's better ways to make money. From the founder side, again, very similar. Somebody said, the problem with this is like, it's not going to help me hit revenue. Guess what? You can hit revenue. I hit my revenue target for 3.5 years, every single year. And then my business got stuck. I have a friend who works at a company that hit revenue targets for 10 years. They're a $50 million company, and they're on the way to going out of business. Like, you have to think big, and you have to think about this not as as Jeff Bezos would say, a regret minimization framework. Like, let's stop wasting time doing the wrong things and celebrating fake successes, and go look for real success where it's like, who cares about 3 million revenue, 4 or 5? Like, dude, I want to be successful. I want to change the game. And then the last thing that I'll say here is, like, I gave you guys an example of like a very niche, small product, right? Like everybody here was like, that sounds boring, cute, like, okay, I guess. So on that one business, I spent all of my time on this. So I'm looking at the free to paid conversion rates for that business right now in front of me in this other screen. In October, it was 13%. In November, it was 20%. In December, it was 17%. And so far in January, it's 9%. That's 10 times higher than the PLG benchmark for free to paid conversion. So like, do I care that I haven't even done outbound yet? Like I haven't even done outbound yet. So I'm sitting here on a profitable company and my churn is low and I'm having a good time, right? And so that's the way to think about this. So don't think of this as like, oh, we're doing X and now we're going to do this micro X, which is, you know, it's a big bet and it's a little scary, but sure, it'll be better. No, this is not micro version of what you're doing before. This is a different way of doing it, a better way of doing it. And what comes out the other end is like, forget like, yeah, we'll make money. You always make money. This is more like, we're going to make money without stress. When we fail, we're going to know what we're doing, what we're going to do next. We're going to be confident, right? We're going to solve real problems and not create fake problems for ourselves by talking about ABM and alignment and all this garbage. Like just focus on the value, placement and value. And that's me off my soapbox.
Errol, I have an extension of a question which I'm going to use to address the question in the chat. And I think you've partly answered it, but if I have a low LTV product, do I still have the luxury of following your irresistible offer framework without killing my CAC? Is the answer in the LTV to CAC ratio? How do you see that?
Well, I just gave an example of a product where I charge 0.0004 cents per request. There isn't even a subscription fee, and I'm halfway to hitting my retirement goal for this business. So like, you know, it really doesn't matter. CAC, most of CAC is just wasted money. Like it really is. There are the way, you know, if you're thinking about high LTV, like let me give you, AWS is a really good example, right? AWS is a company that got my last company that I started to pay $500,000 a year. We never talked to a sales rep, ever. The only times I would talk to a sales rep, I was very unhappy and made me like AWS less. The reason AWS succeeded was they took this huge high LTV offer and boiled it down to a series of infinite sequential impossible to resist offers. So they say, you know what, like there's this whole platform, but I don't want to get your cloud computing business. I'm just going to make it really easy to upload cloud storage. And by the way, it's totally free for 20 gigs. Like I'm not going to make money on you forever. But when you get into that console, there's like this other button that's like, hey, if I click this button, the thing I'm doing becomes 90% cheaper and easier than the other way I'm doing it. Let me check this other AWS product out, right? And so they boil it down to lots of micro things that accumulate over time. So think of like, don't just think of think of, I guess, LTV as a broader thing than like the short-term value that you're accruing. You know what I mean?
Very clear. And there's actually a very good question from Alexandre. I think, Brendan, let's take this one before we go to the live exercise.
Sure.
Because it'll really drive the point home. How is a micro campaign different from just doing what we do right now and additionally testing campaigns on some different looking segments than my usual segment?
Yeah, so I don't know exactly what you mean by testing campaigns. Maybe you're already doing kind of what I would define as a micro campaign. I would say that there are a couple things. So one, the way that I see a micro campaign is, again, think about like all of the data that's in a traditional B2B database. It's not to say that that's not relevant, but that's only part of it. What I would call, like, I don't know of a better term, but like rich data, so things that are relevant for your business. This is where when I'm working with a company to help them build out micro campaigns, like it's very hard for me as an outsider to come up with creative and thoughtful ideas around a micro campaign. Again, I think this is where like kind of there's alpha in the friction. There's alpha in hard work. There's alpha in having to do kind of creative, thoughtful work to come up with these. So these are the data points that are really interesting to build out for a micro campaign that you're not going to find in a B2B database. You're likely going to need some sort of tool that can help you find these rich data points, and very likely, you know, you're going to need to use some or build some little AI agent to do scraping for you. So to go scrape for, keywords in a job post or technologies in a job post, and those technologies are proxies for a good fit, or maybe they just implemented a technology, or they're hiring for a specific role. All of these things should be used as you're building out a micro campaign. And really, again, just to reiterate, like the goal of micro campaign is to convert, if you're reaching out to it today, if you're reaching out to 1,000 people to book a meeting, the goal of a micro campaign is how do you reach out to 100 people to book a meeting, or even 10 people?
Well,
That's
or
the
to
North
convert
Star.
everyone that you reached out to, right?
Yeah, ideally. Yeah.
You should want to, right? Like today you're mass
100%.
blasting. You're like, let me split test this. Like you actually don't want to convert every person on that. You actually think it would be ridiculous if that happened. But on a micro campaign, like if you're doing it right, it wouldn't be like if it happened, you'd be like, I can see why it happened. It's not like ridiculous that it happened. It's just like, on the probability scale, it's probably an outlier, but it's not an accident.
I think that's spot on.
Very clear.
That's spot on. By the way,
Excellent.
one more thing I just want to say is like that original chart that we showed where like, output is going down and volume is going up. Like those trends can't continue forever, I don't think. And so I think there's maybe a world where kind of things bifurcate, and like a lot of this mass spamming is going to spam folders. And then these kind of micro campaigns where you're actually reaching out to people that need your product with relevant messaging based off of that at the right time to the right person. Like actually, when you reach out to 10 people, there's a likelihood that all 10 of those people are going to get an irresistible offer and move forward with the conversation with you. Like that world seems like it might emerge where the spray and pray stuff is actually just going to become almost no part of the pipeline, even though it's significant volumes still. And then micro campaigns become a key part of the pipeline.
And going back to it, right? That's what happened with ads. That's what happened with display ads. So it's not even like a ridiculous thing to say, right? Like we've seen it happen there. It's just happening here.
Yeah, the market becomes more efficient. Yeah.
I think that's a good way to segue into this. Like treat your email campaigns like your ad copy, and suddenly you're starting to think in this sort of micro campaign, irresistible offer world. So we're at 48 minutes. I think if we spend maybe 3 or 4 minutes with each of the volunteers that have bravely raised their hands to build a kind of micro campaign with us live. So Lucas, you raised your hand first. So if you could unmute yourself, and I hand you over to Brendan Erol, who will take this away.
Hey guys. First off, super interesting ideas. I think a really good point from Tarek about the paid ads testing. I originally came from like a growth marketing perspective. I think a lot of this also falls under this like umbrella theme of like finding some lower CAC bubbles, right? Like this kind of what Brendan mentioned, portfolio of different bets, all with the idea of like driving your overall acquisition costs down. So nice to have a new term to call that for outbound. I think from, in terms of the live example, I just joined Haptic. We kind of have a pretty interesting business model. So we're selling software to private equity firms, like mid-market private equity firms, at the same time as we're selling some business services to their portfolio companies. So, a couple cool like outbound motion things that we can do is like, targeting top down, bottoms up, like going after PE firms based on what's happening in their portfolio companies and vice versa. I think the downside that we've been running into, which you guys kind of touched on a bit, is that like specifically for us, those target personas at the private equity firms are pretty averse to any sort of cold outbound. So oftentimes really need to work hard on like striking the right timing and the right message when reaching out to them. For the example, the idea I came up with is we're releasing an intelligent document processing product, specifically for due diligence and private equity. So back to the kind of messaging stuff, external factors that they have is that they're currently spending like a ton of time for like legal reviews and stuff like this. So a bit of context in like M&A due diligence, you want to review like all the contracts, all this type of stuff. They have like 180 questions to answer, right? I think the kind of product value here is that we can, you know, handle a lot of this extraction from like hundreds of documents in a pretty short period of time with like human level accuracy. So, you know, comparing that to them right now, they're spending a ton of money on like external legal counsels, all that type of stuff. We can cut down their costs. We can give them, you know, a faster path to doing due diligence, ideally making some better decisions. So yeah, in terms of the signals, you know, we have pretty standard stuff from PitchBook and everything. We have funding data, so new funds raised or portfolio company investments. We have hiring changes, so like senior position changes in the portfolio companies. We have some first party stuff, website visitors, things like that, but pretty low traffic. And then like, you know, event attendance, which is also a pretty low volume signal, but highly relevant.
Awesome. What is like, can you share like, what is when does the company buy your product? Like what is a great, if you're a sales rep there, like what does a great lead look like? When are you like super excited, or a sales rep there would be super excited?
Yeah. So I think back to that timing thing, right? That's the pain points that they have, like where they feel the pain the most is when they're going through like deal volume, right? Which is generally happening sometime around they start raising funds and all this type of stuff. That's when they really feel the pain of like slowing down due to a bunch of due diligence.
So so when they're raising funds, go ahead.
No.
So when they're raising funds, and hopefully like this reasoning is helpful. This is like, we may not find magic in this one conversation, but hopefully the reasoning is helpful. Like what I would pick into is like, what is the second layer here? Okay, so when they're raising funds, okay, cool. So probably there's some sort of announcement when somebody raises a new fund, and that's when you go reach out to them, right? Similar to like whatever, somebody just becomes the VP of sales, you reach out and you want to sell them, or somebody raises their Series B and you go reach out to them. We're all kind of doing that. First of all, that's fine. You can still do that. I'm not saying not to do that. What I think is interesting is, okay, because when they announce the fund, it's probably several months later, right? So actually, how do we get 90 days ahead of that? So what I would dig into as one example is like, how do you find a proxy for when somebody has raised a fund or is about to raise a fund or is in the process of raising a fund, but hasn't publicly announced it yet, right? I don't know the world enough, but like, is there a certain hire? Like, do they need a CFO around that time? Or is there a certain thing that they're doing as a business around kind of scaling their model that would indicate they're probably in talks with around raising a fund? Are there kind of, again, these signals that they're putting out on the web that you can use as a proxy and then scrape for those things at scale so that you can then monitor, hundreds of thousands of these PE firms and be able to see, okay, interesting. These 4 are hiring for a CFO this week. Maybe that's an indicator that they're in the process of raising a fund, and maybe hiring a CFO is not the right thing.
No, that's usually the case actually with a lot of these, like especially once it goes into investment, right? They start recruiting at least for a bunch of these positions in those portfolio companies.
Okay, amazing. Yeah, so that might be something where there's a few different things that they might recruit for, and that's a signal that you're like, okay, maybe there's something interesting happening here. So I would maybe think about that. Again, I would say the other thing worth noting is like, so they're hiring for a CFO. Let's assume that is like a very strong signal that they're in the process of raising a fund, and raising a fund means that is the problem that they're having is acute, and it's a good time to go sell to them, right? I wouldn't reach out to them with a message that says, saw you're hiring for a CFO, right? Like that's kind of irrelevant to what you're selling them, but it's a proxy for you. So it's a kind of a quote unquote filter or a signal that will tell you, okay, here are the 4 companies I'm going to reach out to today. But my offer, and Erol, I don't know if you want to spitball on this, but like the offer might be totally separate from the signal.
Yeah, I mean, what you just said of like, okay, this is why I'm reaching out to you. No, the guy on the receiving end doesn't give a shit why you're reaching out to him. They care about the offer. You don't need to mention it, right? But the offer here is like, here's the way that I would think about this. Who inside that company benefits from this? like for a second, forget like if we had enough time, here's kind of the exercise I'd go down. Like, who actually is going to get value from this? Like, literally, who's going to use it? And what are they doing at 10:55 a.m. Central Time on January 16th, 17th, 18th? Like, what are they literally doing? Like, what are they doing? And then what is their what the fuck moment, right? So in other words, like, for example, for me, again, just a very simple thing, trykit.ai, email verifier. You know, everybody runs outbound campaigns. When their verified list bounces, you have like a what the fuck campaign, right? Moment. And so if that happens once a quarter, that's different than if it happens weekly. And the intensity of that what the fuck moment also matters. So I would like be trying to figure out like, who are these people? And to Brendan's point, like, what are they doing? And what are the points where they have the highest level of intensity of a feeling or an emotion where they might want to make a change? Because if it happened yesterday and then you email me and it's not going to happen for another month, it's like kind of, it's like you can still maybe implant inception something in my brain, but like you've kind of missed that perfect irresistible offer window in the timing, in terms of timing. And then from there, right, get to an offer they literally cannot refuse. And this is where the last thing I would say is like, if you gave this person who has that what the fuck moment your solution in that moment for free, would they use it? You'd be surprised. A lot of time people just still won't use it, you know? Like, again, people just, this is what I saw in enterprise endlessly. People in the desert will literally die of thirst, refusing water if as a buying group, they've already decided on Coke, because the pain of going back to the buying group and just talking about it is worse than death. So ask yourself these questions to kind of engineer like an irresistible offer. And then when you send it to them, if they don't respond, you're going to learn a ton.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
So we're 57. We're going to try and fit in Nick, who's our second volunteer. And Nick, if we go straight into, let's describe your context. Whom are you trying to reach out to? What kind of signals do you have at hand?
Yeah, thanks, guys. So I work for a company called Clear Membercy. We basically administer dental membership plans for dental practices, or DSOs, which is basically a management group of dental practices. The largest portion of our TAM is in SMB. So the proprietary signal that we've identified is if a dental practice is offering a new patient special on their website, that typically means that they are making efforts to attract new business. The reason why it's a really good sales angle for us is our product basically does the same thing, but it keeps that patient coming back instead of just that one-time discounted price, right? So that's the signal that I'm going after. But some of the challenges, like within SMB, are a lot of the different contacts use non-branded emails or business emails. There's not a lot of scrapable content on these websites. They're not very active on social media. And a lot of the doctors and dentists don't even have like LinkedIn. So a few other signals that I'm really interested in, like stacking other signals on top of that, like do they have a Google ad script on their site? So are they running ads and investing more in that way? But I'm really trying to figure out what more I can add to make it robust. And the offer that we've done in the past when we just had this like as a an outreach campaign was just offering like a case study about comparing new patient specials to dental membership plans. And that was pretty successful, but I think we can do better than that with maybe like some sort of ROI calculator or something else. But just a couple of last things. We don't really have a lot of like levers for discounting our product, and urgency is a challenge for us. And our biggest competitor is the dental practice wanting to administer the plan like themselves without like a vendor. So.
Got it. I could chime in really quickly, and then Erol, maybe you can. But I would say, so two things. One, I think I think it's smart to think about the signals you're thinking about. I think as you're like, other ones that come to mind for me is like, are they expanding practices? Again, are they hiring somebody? Do they have other technologies? Meaning, are they willing to invest in technology around this? Or like Google or Yelp reviews, can you go scrape that? Is that a proxy? If they have a certain amount of Google reviews, that probably indicates a certain amount of revenue. So from like a filtering perspective, You mentioned it's a button on their website. Is that the first signal you mentioned? Is that something you've scraped for to be able to build an agent that monitors 10,000 or 50,000 websites and then it can ping you?
Yeah, so I just used a Claygent and I just gave it a few examples of what like a new patient special would look like, and it just basically pulls in what those details are, like what they're discounting on what specific services and things like that. And so that's been pretty successful overall. But I'm like, what more can I add
Nice.
to that? I did think about the Google and Yelp reviews, trying to make some sort of correlation to patient experience. Some of these customers that have higher reviews, is there any correlation to to digital membership plans? So I've been thinking about that. PMS systems. Especially the ones that are more expensive, that might have a correlation to costs and what they're willing to spend. So we typically find more success in customers that are using specific PMS systems. So those are a couple other things that I have considered as well. I'm just trying to find the right combination to tie it all together, you know?
Yeah, I'd probably layer in the PMS system as like a filter. Errol, anything to add on the offer side of things before we wrap here?
Errol's on mute.
It's all somebody mentioned in the comments like medical is all about referrals. So like just on the offer side, I was just like curious if there's a referral. Going back to the painometer, like you said, I offered a case study, which is like, how much did that hurt you? I wonder if there's like a referral. How much is there something that would hurt you but would lead to some sort of expansion, some sort of trigger event? Like I would maybe play with that. Because the problem with your market is because it's like not very digital, is you're basically playing a game of Battleship. And so when you're playing a game of Battleship, I think aiming for the middle, where you don't know whether you go this way or that way, you know, like you do X, you don't get signal, and you're like, well, what do I do next? Do I go this way or this way? It's sometimes easier to start at extremes, going back to like this pain analogy, and see like what kind of works at all, so you can just as quickly as possible eliminate possibilities, and then work backwards into saying like, okay, now that I have an offer that works, like how do I, like what signals do those people correlate to? It's kind of where my brain went.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think the signals that I have to work with are there. I think I just need to A/B test different offers, different assets, and see what resonates, and then just kind of expand off of that.
Yeah, yours is a tough one. Yours is a tough one because we're talking about signals, and you're in a place where there are none, or there are very few, right? This is why people hire like field sales reps to walk in and find a bunch of signals and see things. Here's a potential idea. Okay, I worked with somebody, I gave this advice. Are there ways to co-sell what you're doing? So like people who already have paths into, because like if you already buy whatever other dentist product, is that a signal? You know what I mean? So like if you can't detect that they're buying the PMS system or whatever, can you go partner with those people? And then maybe the thing that really hurts in the offer is that you give them a couple ribs, but at least you have a hell of a signal. And since these people buy off of referrals, maybe that's a way in.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I didn't think about that, because if I'm going to be scraping to see if those PMS systems are there, and that is an opportunity for somebody else, maybe we can establish a partnership to where they can like funnel business our way. And we do have a partnership program as well, and that's been pretty successful. I've been trying to figure out a way to kind of tie that in too. But yeah, that's definitely something I'll explore. I appreciate that.
Yeah, and there's two, and just like last subtlety, I was brainstorming with somebody where they were like, "Oh, partnerships I can't do to these SMBs because they like have this like weird, it's like a honesty thing where like I don't, if I take money, it's not an honest referral." So we brainstormed it, and basically we're like, how about we partner and I give all your friends the discount instead of giving you the thing, so I make you look really good, because it's it's like by working with you, they get access to these premium discounts with the partner that you built, and so you look good, and if I ever leave you, I would lose this discount maybe. You know what I mean? Like, so there's a lot of different interesting things there to play with.
Yeah, that's how some of our most successful partnerships are currently set up. So maybe just trying to find opportunities to expand more of those with, just other event media outlets that are relevant to our.
Yeah, maybe
Is-
a micro campaign to find more of those partners. You know what I mean? Rather than trying to find more customers, it's like, how do I micro campaign? Like maybe because maybe those partners have a bigger digital footprint. Maybe they have LinkedIn profiles and all that stuff.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea.
I think
Thanks for
that's an
that.
insight that we have from both examples. Thank you so much, Nick. Instead of if your main target is too hard, look for soft targets around them and signals for them, and then make offers to them that allow you to get to your final target. So that's still viable. We're a bit over time, and I apologize for this. It was just too good to cut off. And note to self, we need to do more of these live interactive exercises. I think it's really cool. I just have one last plug before I end this event. Is this event was sourced from the GTM Engineers community. Brendan and Erol are on that community. Most of the audience, I feel, was from that community. If you're not in the community and you'd like to be part of these kinds of conversations, it's very easy to join. There's a QR code I'm sharing. There's also a link on our website from the community page. So just leave us your LinkedIn, your details, and we'll get back to you on how to get you inside. Any closing words, Brendan and Erol?
Thanks for
Thanks
having
for having
me.
me.
This was
Fun.
a fun conversation.
Jinx.
Thank you to both of you. And thank you all for tuning in. This was a really good session. And we have these sessions every couple of weeks. We have live events, either a workshop, office hour, or a webinar. So we'll be back in 2 weeks with another event. And until then, you can follow us on YouTube. You can reach out to us, and we'll see you very shortly. Thank you both, Brendan, Erol, and Nick and Lucas for your time. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
Yes.